Ghostbusters. Classic horror comedy about some bumbling scientists who start a ghost extermination business in New York, and despite at first not being taken seriously, they would in fact become heroes and save the world. The comedy in Ghostbusters is second to none, with some truly memorable quotes and top-tier special effects. Gremlins, fellow supernatural comedy about a young man called Billy Peltzer, who lives in the fictional town of Kingston Falls, who is given a mysterious creature called a mogwai for Christmas, who also comes with 3 important rules. The rules get broken, which results in horrific little monsters running amok in the town, causing much chaos and destruction. Gremlins is a fun, playful creature feature, which also has some truly memorable, shocking moments, ones that stand out from your usual family-orientated fantasy movie. So without a doubt, Ghostbusters and Gremlins are among the greatest of 1980s horror comedies, in a decade full of fantastical and memorable horror comedies. However, not only did both these movies come out in 1984, now making them 40 years old, but did you know they came out on the same day?
What? The same day? No way! That's insane! Well, yeah, both Ghostbusters and Gremlins were released on June the 8th, 1984. That means if you went to a movie theatre on that day, you could have either gone to this screening over here, which was playing Ghostbusters, or this screening over here, which was playing Gremlins. Damn, we were being spoilt in the 80s. In my opinion, and it's just an opinion, cinema is nowhere near as good now as what it was back then.
So in this episode of Weird Tales of Pop Culture, we're going to explore the day that both Ghostbusters and Gremlins ruled the world, by exploring where both these movies came from and the effects they had on the world, both positive and negative. There's not much negative, it's mainly positive because, hello, Gremlins and Ghostbusters, so let's check it out! So it's no joke that I am a huge fan of both Ghostbusters and Gremlins. In fact, if you were to visit my home, you'll find that I have 3 Gremlins, 3 Mogwais, a Proton Pack, my own Ghostbusters jumpsuit, a heap of Ghostbusters action figures, as well as old VHS releases of Ghostbusters and Gremlins, both the Australian editions, American editions, and Japanese editions. Point is, I'm just one of many of whom these 2 wonderful movies have affected their lives, and kind of changed the course and trajectory of their lives. So where did these movies come from, and why is it that on the exact same day we got 2 crazy supernatural comedy capers, ones that were really kind of out of this world? Well, simply put, it was the 1980s, baby, and movies in general at that time were big and out of this world. In the late 70s, larger-than-life blockbuster movies started to be released, like Jaws, Star Wars, Superman the movie, and Alien, to name but a few. A new wave of movies with larger-than-life concepts, with what would have otherwise seemed impossible to create for the big screen now being possible, with a new ambitious dawn of filmmaking, which would continue into the 1980s. So, if you want to see a giant spaceship, no problem. A shark eating someone? You got it. A man flying around the city? Well, here you go. A monstrous growling demon? Heck, I'll have that ready for you by Thursday. A swashbuckling adventurer running around getting into all kinds of scrapes? Well, who wouldn't want to see that? A child's bike flying over the moon's face? Well, here's your money shot. So naturally, this was the perfect world for Ghostbusters and Gremlins. A world that had a first for both of these movies. Ghostbusters itself came from the mind of Dan Aykroyd, thanks to a lifelong belief and fascination of the supernatural, in which his mother claimed to see ghosts, which caused Aykroyd to come up with the concept of an organisation which caught and trapped ghosts, like some kind of supernatural pest control. Speaking of Jaws, Aykroyd retreated to Martha's Vineyard, where Jaws was filmed, to work on his script for Ghostbusters. So yeah, while he's making this comedy movie about these guys in New York capturing ghosts, he was actually in the surroundings of where a shark was eating people. Originally, Aykroyd saw himself, Eddie Murphy, and John Belushi playing the Ghostbusters. In fact, he had just written a line for Belushi when he got the call that Belushi had died, and Aykroyd lost his friend and colleague. But despite this terrible event, Aykroyd still soldiered on with the script, and thought that if he couldn't get Belushi, no problem, he'll get Bill Murray instead, with Aykroyd more or less having to draft him into the picture. And this first interpretation of Ghostbusters was pretty far out there, with the Ghostbusters living in the future and being able to travel into other dimensions. Thankfully, when director Ivan Reitman and co-writer Harold Ramis got involved, the script's craziness was toned down, with it being more grounded. And so, with its cast and crew in place, Ghostbusters very much felt like its humour was of the Saturday Night Live and National Lampoon's ilk. Be that National Lampoon's mixed in with the ghosts and terrors of Poltergeist. Hey, and that's not a stretch, as Richard Edlund, who did the effects of Poltergeist, would also do the effects for Ghostbusters. Now, I believe that Ghostbusters was part of a comedy trend at that time, a sort of slobs versus snobs comedy trope. Or be that an evolution of it. You know, this idea of us versus them, where we would see characters, usually drunks or slackers or underachievers, or in some cases all three, who were downtrodden by their peers or communities, who must rise to the top to victory to prove their self-worth. This was kind of a trait which started with Animal House, which was slobs versus school bullies, which carried on with Caddyshack, which was Animal House on a golf course, and then Stripes, which was Animal House in the army, and then Police Academy, which was Animal House in the police force, with Ghostbusters kind of being Animal House with ghosts. And let's keep in mind that supernatural ghost stories were also big business at that time, so it would have seemed very logical pairing these two genres. And Ghostbusters, I think, is very much part of the slobs versus snobs trope, as the movie starts with the Ghostbusters being seen as a joke, and unworthy of respect by other people, those who see themselves as high-class members of society. Heck, the movie even features a scene where the character Louis Tully is potentially being mauled to death by a demon dog, but the attendees of a posh restaurant couldn't give a crap. Wow, as a kid, I found the uncaring restaurant people to be just as disturbing as the demon dog. Keep in mind that Ghostbusters was also going to have more adult Animal House-styled humour, which we can see through a variety of deleted scenes, with it being specifically explained that Ray Stantz did indeed receive a blob job from that flying ghost, as well as a single shot that shows that one of the Ghostbusters had been having, well, adult sleepovers. My money's on Peter. As Ghostbusters was the brainchild of Dan Aykroyd, Gremlins was the brainchild of writer-director Chris Columbus, who would actually go on to direct Home Alone and the first two Harry Potter movies. He got the idea of writing Gremlins one night while trying to sleep in his loft and hearing what sounded like an army of mice scavenging around the place in the pitch-black darkness. This disturbed Columbus so much, he decided to take this fear of being terrorized by little monsters and use it as the basis of a movie script. Now, the original script for Gremlins was a much more all-out splatterfest horror movie. For example, in the original script, the Gremlins kill Billy Peltzer's mum and throw her decapitated head down the stairs of the family home. The Gremlins also eat Billy's dog Barney, and it was in fact Gizmo himself who transforms and becomes the main villain of the movie, Stripe. Columbus would take his spec script for Gremlins to producers and movie studios, but not to turn Gremlins into a movie, but to prove to the studios and other higher-ups that he had what it takes to write a script. So there was never the intention to make Gremlins into a film. You know, he was just using it to get work, so maybe he could be hired to work on another movie. However, the script found itself to the big guy himself, Steven Spielberg, who loved it and found the script to be very original, and so he bought Gremlins with the intention of producing a Gremlins movie. Now, with Spielberg at the helm, the script's more brutal elements were gone, and the movie was now a family-friendly crowd pleaser, full of Amblin's Spielberg-isms. Incidentally, there are also claims that after the release of E.T. in 1982, Spielberg was planning a sequel, which featured a group of E.T. alien creatures, only these ones weren't kind like E.T., but were more mischievous, and of course would go on to run amok. So who knows, maybe he combined his E.T. sequel with the original Gremlins script to create what we got. Director Joe Dante was subsequently hired as director, as he previously worked with Spielberg by directing the It's a Wonderful Life segment in the Twilight Zone movie 1 year earlier. And I feel like with Joe Dante came homages to 1950s B monster movies. I mean, heck, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is directly referenced. Now, if I was to see any commentaries that Gremlins may have had at the time, I guess maybe it's the commercialism of Christmas, especially when it comes to marketing aimed at children, aka toys. I mean, just think about it. The movie's final battle takes place at a department store on Christmas Eve. And also keep in mind, E.T., which came out 2 years earlier, would also unleash a ton of merchandising, including E.T. plushies, of which actually featured in Gremlins. And also keep in mind that this was the time of the Cabbage Patch doll craze, which was in full effect, with desperate parents trying to get their hands on some of these dolls for their kids in time for Christmas. Much like how Randall Peltzer was desperate to get his hands on a Mogwai for his son for Christmas. Maybe Gremlins is a satire on this. A sort of, imagine if you get one of these dolls or toys, but they become evil and wreak chaos. And while we're talking about deleted scenes, let's not forget that there was an entirely removed subplot from Gremlins, where there was some major conspiracy within the town that Mrs. Deagle was forcing a heap of people out of their homes by getting the bank to foreclose their mortgages in order to get their property and build some kind of toxic chemical plant, where Gerald busts a secret meeting between Billy and Kate, and he's actually behaving really sinister about the whole ordeal, almost intimidating. Yeah, this guy's full menacing. Damn, now I really don't feel bad about Mrs. Deagle meeting her maker. Seriously, she was going to destroy the entire town. What a cow. And speaking of Gerald, unlike the final film, where he just sort of simply disappears halfway through, we do see his character again, where during the Gremlins attack, he has seemingly got insane and locked himself in the bank's vault. But, you know, Gremlins is a monster movie. That's all you need. Little monsters. We didn't really need plots of town conspiracies involving toxic waste plants or bank employees going cuckoo. So this stuff was right to get cut out. Also, here are some early prototypes of Gizmo. Yeah, pretty weird, huh? You wouldn't want to wake up to find one of these growing on your balls. So it's here we get to the 8th of July, 1984. Well, apart from Gremlins and Ghostbusters, what else happened that day? Well, on that day, Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time reached number 1. A tornado nearly destroyed the town of Barnveld in Wisconsin, leaving behind a very destructive tragedy. And Star Trek III: The Search for Spock is enjoying the number 1 spot in the box office. Yes, the movie which sees Spock being resurrected and losing his virginity. By way of, finger stroking, sure, why not? But Star Trek III: The Search for Spock was about to get knocked off its box office mantle. In fact, that day there were actually 3 major movies that were released. The other being a dance drama called Beat Street, a movie which is said to have brought the hip-hop movement to Germany, and despite not being a massive success at the time, has still gone on to be considered a cult classic. So July the 8th, 1984 wasn't just about Gremlins and Ghostbusters, but it was also the day of Beat Street. However, it seemed that it was all eyes on Ghostbusters and Gremlins. Ghostbusters was definitely the more financially successful of the 2 movies, with it earning $296 million, whereas Gremlins made $212 million, which is still very impressive. Everyone seemed to have praised Ghostbusters, with it being seen as a major achievement in both comedy and movie making in general. However, despite also being a horror comedy, Gremlins seemed to have come under more scrutiny. Parents groups in particular seem to be horrified with the violence and gore seen in Gremlins, with it being felt that Gremlins was too sadistic and unacceptable for kids, with stories of many parents and their kids walking out of the movie in theaters before the movie finished. Something I find really interesting is Siskel and Ebert's reviews of both Ghostbusters and Gremlins. Now, they absolutely praised both movies and did seem to genuinely love them, but I noticed that in Ebert's review of Gremlins, within the praises, he just had to add in that it's a mean movie and not the nice, happy, delightful E.T. movie. Now, isn't that interesting? Yes, Gremlins had some pretty horrific moments, but so did Ghostbusters. Take the scene where Dana Barrett gets kidnapped by the arms in her couch, while screaming for dear life, or the rotten corpse driving the taxi. Two scenes which look like they could have been plucked straight out of an Evil Dead movie. So why is it we were praising Ghostbusters like it's nobody's business, while also adding caution to Gremlins? Well, maybe Ghostbusters masked it well by not making itself look like an E.T. movie, and also it didn't quite have the gross out moments of Gremlins, where we literally see guts. The only guts we see in Ghostbusters is that of Mr. Stay Puffs. And if what Ebert was saying is anything to go by, it seems that it's also because of the Spielberg connection, and that people were automatically going to connect Gremlins to E.T. and expect it to be a fun, whimsical, modern fairy tale just like that movie, where instead you see Billy Peltzer's mum going full kitchen Rambo killing monsters. Also keep in mind that in Gremlins marketing you never actually see the monsters, just the Mogwai, and it did seem like more of a family fantasy movie. So maybe that just added to the allure that Gremlins was going to be another E.T. movie. Also, as mentioned, Gizmo could have been symbolic of a child's toy or Christmas present, and maybe this idea of children's toys coming to life and turning into deadly monsters was just too much for people at that time. A similar thing that'll happen a few years later with Child's Play. In fact, there was so much concern that Gremlins was going to be mistaken as an E.T. movie, director Joe Dante himself added his own thoughts on this issue by saying, quote, "The idea of taking a 4-year-old to see Gremlins, thinking that it's going to be a cuddly, funny animal movie, and then seeing that it turns into a horror picture, I think people were upset. They felt like they had been sold something family friendly, and it wasn't entirely family friendly." So maybe there wouldn't have been the controversy if, like Ghostbusters, Gremlins marketed itself more as an adult fantasy. One for older movie audiences, not necessarily small children. Although that said, Ghostbusters was not without its own controversies. The biggest one being aimed at Ray Parker Jr.'s catchy as hell, funky Ghostbusters song. Oh yeah, this song had everyone singing along with it and still does. Which actually led to a lawsuit by Huey Lewis and the News, who felt that the Ghostbusters song was a copy of their song, I Want a New Drug. Not to be confused with the Weird Al parody, I Want a New Duck. And yes, if you listen to both Ghostbusters and I Want a New Drug side by side, the tunes do sound very similar. Then Harvey Comics also filed a lawsuit against Ghostbusters, feeling like the Ghostbusters logo was a rip-off of the Casper the Friendly Ghost character, Fatso. And not only were they demanding $50 million, but for each and every copy of Ghostbusters to be destroyed. Yikes. Thankfully, this case wasn't successful. Bill Murray would also quit acting in major movie roles for 4 years after making Ghostbusters, supposedly because he felt disheartened that Ghostbusters was such a huge hit, a silly movie that he more or less got drafted into by Dan Aykroyd, whereas Razor's Edge, which was his passion project at that time, the movie that he thought would be his making, was a flop. So he wasn't going to be remembered for his acting and heart that he gave to Razor's Edge, but rather that wacky movie that featured that giant marshmallow man. So it was awards season in 1985, and Ghostbusters was nominated for Best Song, that being Ray Parker Jr.'s Ghostbusters, but it lost to Stevie Wonder's I Just Called to Say I Love You from Woman in Red. Bill Murray was nominated for Best Actor, but lost to Dudley Moore in Mickey and Maude. Oh come on, I've never even heard of that movie. It also lost for Best Special Effects to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And, okay, I love Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but are the special effects in that movie really better than Ghostbusters? Like, I can't even. Now, Gremlins didn't get any Academy mentions, but it won Saturn Awards for Best Director for Joe Dante, Best Horror Film, Best Music for Jerry Goldsmith, as well as an award for Chris Walas for his creature effects on the movie. And oddly, even a Best Actress award for Polly Holliday for her performance as Mrs. Deagle. Okay, the more you learn about the awards situation for Gremlins and Ghostbusters, the weirder it gets. It was also merchandise galore for both movies, as both movies would get novelizations, breakfast cereals, Atari games, and release soundtracks and many more. Ha! To conclude, both movies have had insanely successful longevity, and I would say that they are just as popular now as they were when they were released, but I think I would have to say that they're even more popular and celebrated now. Ghostbusters would become one of the most successful franchises of all time, thanks to its animated series and sequels, which are still going on now. And the first movie itself is often considered one of the greatest comedies of all time. And in part, the controversy of Gremlins would lead to the creation of the PG-13 rating system, so family movies can now have a little edge. And yes, when you think about it, Gremlins did change the movie industry. And so Gremlins and Ghostbusters may mean many things to many people these days. But let's not also forget these movies' humble beginnings. On that day in July 1984, when both these fantastic movies were released, and the world of cinema was never going to be the same again. July the 8th, 1984 may have seemed like just another day, but in reality, it was the day that two cinematic juggernauts arrived. It was the day that Ghostbusters and Gremlins ruled the world.
I love this town!
Wow, is Ghostbusters and Gremlins seriously 40 years old now? Where did the time go? That's insane! It feels like just yesterday I was a kid watching them on old VHS tapes. Needless to say, they just don't make them like this anymore. These days I feel like movies have lost their magic and have become, how can I put this, chess pieces for people to attack each other's politics with. Where unfortunately everyone, as in everyone, both sides, are angry and the quality of movie making has dropped, as movies now seem to be made to serve this silly war. And it is all just silly. In other words, there's now no love. And I think that that's why people adore movies like Ghostbusters and Gremlins, to remind us why we do love movies and why storytelling is important to us. Because otherwise, what's the point? So remember guys, it's all about the love. Anyway, I'm Minty, and happy birthday to Ghostbusters and Gremlins. You are now officially middle-aged. See ya!